Mike and his wife Beth had just finished building their daughter's new bed. It was a beautiful antique that Beth's mother had passed down to their daughter Sarah. They thought that they had set it up properly, but when it came time for their young 3-year-old to go to bed, something out of the ordinary happened. It started with little Sarah screaming. Mike raced up the stairs 2 at a time to get to his daughter. He found her cowering in her room. What was wrong? Sarah Knott was a bright and curious young girl who meant the world to her parents. She loved adventure and often asked her parents to read her bedtime stories. The bedtime stories became a nightly ritual, and Beth would read the story while Mike prepared to tuck her in for the night. It was a wonderful routine that made everyone happy. Unfortunately, things couldn't last forever, and one night, everything changed. Sarah should have been happy, but she was now scared. What had happened to their daughter? When Beth first discovered Sarah's nighttime terrors, she thought it was normal. She was a 3-year-old with a very vivid imagination, but things only got worse over time. It was when Sarah told her mother something alarming that she started to understand what might truly be wrong. Sarah didn't want to sleep in her bed, but Beth thought it was just a phase. Sarah was always a girl filled with excitement and smiles, but she stopped smiling whenever bedtime drew near. It all circled around the bed, which was supposed to be a gift. Beth started to think about how it all started. Her mother wanted to give Sarah a proper bed, one that would last her well into her teenage years, but she was very persuasive, as if she had some kind of personal stake in the matter. Once set up, the bed looked strengy among the modern chic of their home. Beth didn't want to argue with her mother, and it meant they wouldn't have to buy a new bed for Sarah in the future. But the bed came with a cost. Ever since its arrival, Sarah was terrified. They needed to find out just what was so terrifying about the bed. Sarah's terrors only got worse as time went on. Mike was overprotective of his little girl, but even he couldn't figure out what was going on. When it came time for Sarah to go to bed each night, she would hold firm in the doorframe, adamant that she couldn't go in. But once she did go in, it seemed that she wouldn't sleep at all. Mike couldn't stand the sound of his daughter's cries. He thought of a solution. He wanted to see what was so bad with the bed, even if he'd have to sleep in it himself. Mike tried his best to be a good father. He carried Sarah to bed and thought that properly tucking her in would fix everything. But as they approached the bed, he could feel her little body tremble. "There's nothing to fear, honey." "Look, it's just a bed," Mike said as he laid Sarah in her bed. But her hand stayed on his neck. She was reluctant to let go. Then Sarah did something that Mike didn't expect. She started begging him to let her sleep anywhere but the bed. Mike didn't know what to say. Mike looked at his daughter's pleading eyes and sat on the edge of the bed. He tried thinking of something to say, but that was when a strange feeling overwhelmed him. It felt like something was slowly creeping into his psyche. He felt colder than seconds ago and could swear there was a breeze on him. All the windows and doors were closed. What was going on? Mike quickly sat back up. His weary mind excused the previous feelings as fatigue. He did have a long day at work, but as he left the room he would remember that feeling. Despite the unease he felt, Mike didn't want to alarm Beth or Sarah. He convinced himself that it was all in his head, a trick of the mind brought on by worry and lack of sleep. But Sarah's terror was unrelenting. She refused to sleep in the bed, her fear growing stronger each night. Mike and Beth tried everything: new bedding, night lights, even sleeping beside her, but nothing worked. Sarah's once bright and energetic demeanor was fading, replaced by dark circles under her eyes and a quiet, lingering sadness. The beautiful bed was turning into a family nightmare. Beth's mother, unaware of the turmoil the bed had caused, was adamant that they keep it. She reminded Beth of its history and value, insisting that Sarah would grow to love it in time. But Beth's instincts told her otherwise. She could see the change in her daughter, and the once treasured gift now felt like a burden. Torn between her respect for her mother and her concern for Sarah, Beth struggled with what to do. The bed, meant to be a symbol of family legacy, was now a source of growing tension. The strain on the family was becoming unbearable. Sarah's refusal to sleep in the bed was taking a toll on everyone. Mike and Beth found themselves arguing more frequently, each feeling helpless and frustrated. Mike believed they needed to be patient, while Beth's worry grew with each sleepless night. The bed, once a gift meant to bring joy, had become a wedge between them. Desperate for answers, they knew they couldn't go on like this. Something had to change, but they had no idea how deep the mystery really went. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. He began to question everything. Was Sarah's fear really just a phase? Was the bed truly just an old piece of furniture? Or was there something more sinister at play? He spent hours researching online, looking for explanations, but found nothing concrete. Despite his doubts, he felt the need to protect his family. He decided to investigate the bed further, determined to find a logical explanation for Sarah's terror. But as he looked at his daughter's haunted eyes, he feared there was more to the story than he could understand. As Beth watched her daughter, she couldn't ignore the changes. Sarah, once full of life and curiosity, was now quiet and withdrawn. She avoided her room, flinching at the mere mention of bedtime. The fear in her eyes was unmistakable, and it broke Beth's heart. The tension in the house was thick, and even in the daylight, the shadow of the bed loomed over them all. Beth knew they couldn't continue like this. Something had to be done before their happy home was completely overtaken by the darkness that seemed to emanate from the bed. With no other options left, Mike decided to take matters into his own hands. He would sleep in Sarah's bed himself, hoping to understand what was causing her so much fear. He shared his plan with Beth, who reluctantly agreed. That night they set up a small camera in the room, hoping to capture anything unusual. As Sarah slept in their bed, Mike settled into hers, determined to prove that it was just a bed and nothing more. But as the night wore on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him. Mike lay awake, his senses on high alert. The room was eerily silent, save for the occasional creak of the old house settling. Hours passed and nothing happened. Mike began to feel foolish for even considering that there could be something wrong with the bed. But just as he started to drift off, he heard a soft, almost imperceptible creak, as if someone had just stepped into the room. His heart raced as he reached for the flashlight, but when he scanned the room there was nothing there. Yet the sense of unease lingered. The next morning Mike reviewed the footage from the camera but found nothing unusual. No strange movements, no shadows, nothing to explain the unease he felt. He began to doubt his own experiences, wondering if stress and lack of sleep were playing tricks on his mind. But Sarah's fear hadn't diminished. Despite his best efforts to reassure her, she continued to avoid the room, her anxiety growing worse with each passing day. Mike couldn't shake the feeling that there was something he was missing, something just out of reach. On the third night, Mike decided to try again. He set up the camera, tucked Sarah into their bed, and settled into her room once more. As he lay there, the house was silent. The only sound was his own breathing. But then, just as he was about to fall asleep, he heard it again, the same soft creaking sound. This time it was louder, closer, as if someone was right beside him. His pulse quickened as he sat up, shining the flashlight around the room. Again there was nothing, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. As Mike continued his nightly vigils, Sarah's condition worsened. She began waking up in the middle of the night, screaming in terror. When Beth rushed to her side, Sarah would cling to her, crying about shadows in the room. Beth's heart ached for her daughter, who had once slept so peacefully. The nightmares were becoming more frequent, and Sarah's fear of the bed was now accompanied by a fear of the dark. Beth and Mike knew they couldn't let this continue, but they still had no answers. The bed was at the center of it all. But why? Beth's unease led her to research the bed's history. She contacted her mother, asking about the origins of the antique. To her surprise, her mother's recollection was vague. The bed had been passed down through the family, but no one could remember exactly where it came from. Beth's mother mentioned that the bed had always been considered special but couldn't provide any details. The lack of information only fueled Beth's anxiety. What if the bed wasn't just a family heirloom? What if it carried a dark history that no one had bothered to uncover? The sleepless nights and growing fear were taking a toll on the entire family. Sarah's once bright and happy demeanor was fading, replaced by a constant state of anxiety. Beth and Mike were exhausted, their patience wearing thin. They had tried everything, sleeping in Sarah's room, comforting her, even considering moving her to a different room entirely. But nothing seemed to work. The bed, once a cherished gift, had become a curse. Beth began to question whether they should keep it at all. But how could they explain to her mother that the bed was the source of all this turmoil? Unable to ignore the effects any longer, Mike decided it was time to take more drastic measures. They couldn't continue living like this, and Sarah's well-being was their top priority. Mike suggested they get rid of the bed entirely, despite knowing it would upset Beth's mother. Beth hesitated, torn between loyalty to her mother and concern for her daughter. But as she looked at Sarah, pale and exhausted, she knew they had no choice. The bed had to go, and with it, hopefully, the darkness that had taken hold of their lives. The night before they planned to remove the bed, Beth and Mike decided to give it one last chance. They wanted to see if there was something, anything, they could uncover that might explain Sarah's fear. Mike set up the camera again, this time positioning it at different angles. As they put Sarah to bed in their room, a sense of finality settled over them. This was it, the last night the bed would be in their home. Beth felt a mix of relief and sadness, hoping that by morning their lives would return to normal. That night, as Mike lay in the bed, he finally heard it clear as day. A low, almost imperceptible whisper. His heart pounded as he strained to listen, but the words were unintelligible, more like a breath than a voice. He jumped up, searching the room, but found nothing. The whisper stopped as suddenly as it started, leaving behind an eerie silence. Mike couldn't believe what he had heard. There was something in the room, something he couldn't see or explain. He knew now that they had made the right decision to get rid of the bed. The next morning, Mike reviewed the footage from the night before. His hands trembled as he watched, half expecting to see something that would confirm his fears. But the video showed nothing unusual, no shadows, no movements, no sign of the whisper he had heard. Mike felt a mix of relief and frustration. He had heard it, he was sure of it, but there was no evidence. He shared his experience with Beth, who believed him without question. They both knew they couldn't take any more chances. The bed had to go, and the sooner the better. With heavy hearts, Beth and Mike prepared to remove the bed. Beth called her mother to break the news, dreading the conversation. As expected, her mother was upset, unable to understand why they would get rid of such a precious family heirloom. Beth tried to explain, but how could she convey the fear that had overtaken their home? In the end, her mother reluctantly agreed, but the strain in her voice was clear. Beth felt a pang of guilt, but she knew they were doing the right thing. Sarah's safety and well-being came first. But would this finally solve the problem they were having? But then, things took an unexpected turn. Just as Beth and Mike were finalizing their decision to remove the bed, the phone rang. It was Beth's mother, announcing that she was coming over for a visit. The news threw their plans into disarray. Beth's heart sank as she knew her mother's love for the bed would complicate things. They had planned to get rid of the bed that very day, but now, with her mother on the way, that plan had to be put on hold. Mike grimaced, sensing the inevitable tension. When Beth's mother arrived, her eyes lit up as she spotted the bed. "Oh, it looks wonderful here," she exclaimed, running her fingers along the ornate carvings. Beth swallowed hard, trying to find the words to explain the situation. "Mom, we've had some issues with Sarah and the bed," she said carefully. Her mother waved her hand dismissively. "She's just being a child." "I'm sure it's nothing serious," Mike and Beth exchanged worried glances, knowing it was far more serious than her mother realized. Beth's mother sat down on the bed, smiling fondly as she reminisced about her childhood. "This bed was mine when I was little. I had so many wonderful dreams here," she said, her voice full of nostalgia. "Sarah will love it in time. She just needs to get used to it." Beth wanted to scream. How could she make her mother understand the sleepless nights, Sarah's terror, and the strange occurrences? She bit her tongue, unsure how to navigate the situation without causing a family rift. Sarah, still clinging tightly to Beth's side, eyed the bed with visible dread. She refused to go near it, her small hands gripping Beth's shirt. See, Mom, Beth gestured toward Sarah's reaction. She's genuinely afraid, but Beth's mother laughed softly. Children go through phases, you know that. When you were her age, you were scared of the dark, remember? It'll pass. Beth looked down at Sarah, her heart aching. This wasn't a phase. This fear was real, and her daughter was suffering. The conversation with her mother felt like walking on eggshells. Beth wanted to shout that it wasn't just Sarah's imagination, that something was wrong with the bed. But every time she tried to bring up the eerie feelings and the sleepless nights, her mother brushed it off as parental overreaction. You're overthinking it, her mother said firmly. Beth clenched her fists, feeling her frustration rise. How could she convince her mother that this wasn't normal, that something was deeply wrong with this antique heirloom? As the evening wore on, Mike grew increasingly uncomfortable. While Beth and her mother exchanged pleasantries, his mind kept wandering back to the unsettling experiences in Sarah's room. The whisper he had heard, the strange creaks, the cold draft. He couldn't shake the feeling that the bed was the cause. Every time he glanced into Sarah's room, a shiver ran down his spine. He tried to engage in conversation, but the tension gnawed at him. They needed to get rid of the bed, and soon. Beth's mother stayed well into the evening, chatting cheerfully and oblivious to the strained atmosphere. They sat together in the living room, trying to maintain a sense of normalcy. But the tension was suffocating. Sarah refused to leave Beth's lap, her eyes darting nervously toward her bedroom door. Every time they walked past the room, Sarah whimpered, hiding her face in Beth's shoulder. Beth felt trapped, knowing her mother's presence was preventing them from acting. The bed remained, and so did the creeping unease. As Beth's mother settled down for tea, she finally noticed Sarah's unusual behavior. "She's still scared of the bed?" she asked, frowning in confusion. Beth nodded. "Yes, it's been getting worse. She won't even go near her room now." Her mother shook her head in disbelief. "I just don't understand. It's the same bed I slept on for years. There's nothing wrong with it." Beth sighed, feeling the weight of the conversation pressing down on her. How could she make her mother see what they were experiencing? With her mother's visit stretching well into the night, Beth and Mike had no choice but to delay their plan to remove the bed. They couldn't possibly get rid of it with her mother right there, watching them closely. Beth's frustration grew, torn between respecting her mother's attachment to the heirloom and protecting her daughter. Every glance at the bed filled her with dread. She knew the bed had to go, but how could they act without causing a serious rift with her mother? As the night dragged on, Beth's mother finally began gathering her things to leave. "Well, it's been lovely, but I'll be on my way. Just enjoy the bed as much as I did. It will give you the sweetest of dreams." Beth only sighed. She knew there was no way that that bed could give either one of them sweet dreams. It has only been wreaking havoc on their lives. With her mother now gone, Beth and Mike finally resolved to get rid of the bed once and for all. They weren't going to wait another night. Mike arranged for the bed to be taken away the following day. As the movers dismantled it, Sarah watched from a distance, her expression unreadable. For the first time in weeks, there was a glimmer of relief in her eyes. The bed, once a source of pride and joy, was now nothing more than a bad memory they were eager to forget. As the last piece of the bed was carried out of the house, Beth and Mike exchanged a glance, both silently hoping that this would be the end of their nightmare. As the movers drove away with the bed, Beth felt an unexpected pang of sadness and guilt. She had grown up hearing her mother's stories about the bed, and it held sentimental value. But the fear in Sarah's eyes had been too much to bear. "How am I going to explain this to Mom?" Beth thought, biting her lip. She knew her mother would be disappointed, maybe even angry. But deep down, Beth believed they had made the right choice for their family. Beth dreaded calling her mother. She had hoped to avoid conflict, but now it seemed inevitable. She dialed the number slowly, her stomach twisting with anxiety. "Mom, the bed is gone," Beth said, her voice shaking slightly. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Gone?" her mother finally asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. Beth braced herself for the conversation she had been dreading. Beth's mother didn't take the news well. "I can't believe you just got rid of it like that," she exclaimed, her voice full of hurt. Beth felt a wave of guilt wash over her. "I'm sorry, Mom," she whispered. Sarah was terrified. We didn't have a choice, but her explanation didn't seem to ease the tension. Her mother's silence was heavy, and Beth knew their relationship might never be the same. Beth's mother was livid. "How could you just throw away a piece of our family history? That bed has been in our family for generations." Her voice trembled with anger, each word sharp and cutting. Beth winced, gripping the phone tightly. "Mom, I didn't just throw it away. We had no choice." Sarah was terrified. It was affecting her, affecting all of us. But her mother wasn't listening. "You're being dramatic, Beth. You should have called me first before making such a rash decision." The sting of her words left Beth silent, guilt weighing heavily on her heart. The conversation ended with Beth's mother hanging up abruptly, leaving a cold silence in its wake. Beth stared at the phone, her stomach churning. She had always respected her mother's attachment to family traditions, but this time it had come at too great a cost. Tears welled up in her eyes as she sat on the edge of the couch. "What have I done?" she whispered to herself. Mike, noticing her distress, wrapped his arms around her. "You did what was best for Sarah," he said softly, but Beth wasn't sure how she would ever mend the rift with her mother. With the bed gone, Sarah's room felt different. The oppressive atmosphere that had hung over it was lifted, replaced by a sense of calm. Beth and Mike decided to redecorate, hoping to create a fresh start for their daughter. They let Sarah choose new bedding and decorations, involving her in every step of the process. As they worked together, the tension that had weighed on the family began to ease. For the first time in weeks, they felt like things might finally return to normal. But the memory of the bed lingered, a reminder of the darkness they had faced. That night, Sarah slept in her newly decorated room for the first time. Beth and Mike held their breath as they tucked her in, waiting for any sign of fear. But Sarah smiled, a genuine smile they hadn't seen in weeks. She snuggled into her new bed, surrounded by her favorite toys and blankets. Beth read her a story, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Sarah drifted off to sleep without a single tear. Beth and Mike watched over her for a few moments longer, then quietly left the room, feeling a wave of relief. But was the nightmare truly over? With Sarah sleeping peacefully in her new bed, the Knott family finally felt like they were on the road to recovery. The sleepless nights and fear that had plagued their home were beginning to fade into the background. Beth and Mike could see the change in Sarah. Her bright, bubbly personality was returning, and the dark circles under her eyes were disappearing. The tension that had driven a wedge between Beth and Mike was also easing, replaced by a renewed sense of unity. They were finally getting their lives back, and it felt like a victory. In the days that followed, Beth and Mike often found themselves reflecting on the events that had transpired. The bed, once a beautiful piece of furniture, had brought so much fear and anxiety into their lives. They couldn't explain what had happened or why, but they knew one thing for sure: they had done the right thing by removing it. The experience had brought them closer as a family, reminding them of what truly mattered. They vowed never to let something like this disrupt their lives again. But the memory of the bed would never be far from their minds. As the days turned into weeks, the Knott family settled into a new routine. Sarah's room, once a place of fear, was now a sanctuary of comfort and safety. Beth and Mike made sure to fill their home with laughter and love, making up for the lost time. They spent more time together as a family, cherishing the moments they had almost lost. The dark chapter of the bed was behind them, and they were ready to move forward. But every now and then they would catch each other's eye, as if they knew this was far from over. Despite the peace that had returned to their home, Beth couldn't shake a lingering doubt. What if the bed had been more than just a piece of furniture? What if there was something truly wrong with it? Something they couldn't see or understand? She found herself researching similar stories, trying to find answers, but nothing seemed to fit. The idea that something so seemingly innocent could have such a dark influence was unsettling. Beth kept these thoughts to herself, not wanting to reopen old wounds, but the questions remained, lurking in the back of her mind. Beth and Mike never spoke about the bed again, at least not directly. They both knew that discussing it would only bring back the fear and uncertainty they had worked so hard to overcome. Instead, they focused on the future, making plans and setting goals for their family. But the bed remained a silent presence in their thoughts, a reminder of the fragility of their peace. They didn't know what had caused the events, and perhaps they never would. But they had made it through, and that was all that mattered. Months passed, and life returned to normal. But one day there was a knock at the door. It was an antique dealer who knew their grandma and had known a few things about the bed. He seemed surprised to see them and asked if they were still happy with the bed. Mike hesitated before answering, telling the dealer that they no longer had it. The dealer's expression changed slightly, a look of quiet understanding crossing his face. He didn't ask why or where the bed had gone, but his silence spoke volumes. It was as if he knew more than he was letting on. Before leaving, the dealer paused and looked at Mike. "Some things," he said quietly, "are better left alone." His words sent a chill down Mike's spine. What did the dealer know about the bed? Had others experienced the same fear and anxiety that had plagued their family? Mike wanted to ask, but the dealer turned and walked away before he could. The encounter left Mike with more questions than answers, but he knew one thing for sure: he was glad the bed was gone. Whatever it had brought into their lives, it was best left in the past. As the days passed, Mike and Beth couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the bed's mystery. There were so many unanswered questions. Where had the bed come from? Why had it affected their family so deeply? And what did the dealer know that he wasn't telling them? They tried to move on, but the questions lingered, like a shadow that wouldn't go away. Beth considered reaching out to her mom or the dealer, but something held her back. Perhaps some mysteries were meant to remain unsolved. The dealer's warning stayed with Mike, haunting his thoughts. He wondered what the man had meant and whether the bed had a darker history than they realized. But every time he considered digging deeper, something stopped him. It was as if a part of him didn't want to know the truth. Mike decided to let it go, to focus on his family and the future. The bed was gone, and with it the fear and darkness that had nearly torn them apart. But deep down, he knew that some secrets might never be revealed. Beth and Mike decided to move on completely by redecorating the whole house, changing the look and feel of their home to something new and refreshing. They replaced the furniture, repainted the walls, and made sure there were no reminders of the bed left in the house. The process was cathartic, a way to exorcise the lingering fear that had once dominated their lives. As they stood back and admired their work, they felt a sense of closure. The bed was gone, the darkness with it, and they were ready to start anew. Sarah's recovery was slow but steady. With the bed gone, her nightmares stopped, and she began to sleep through the night again. The fear that had once gripped her was fading, replaced by the joy and curiosity of a typical 3-year-old. Beth and Mike watched their daughter closely, relieved to see her returning to her old self. They were careful not to push her too fast, allowing her to heal at her own pace. The change in her was a testament to the strength of their family, and it gave them hope for the future. The ordeal with the bed had brought the Knott family closer together. Beth and Mike realized how much they relied on each other, and their bond was stronger than ever. They knew that they had been through something extraordinary, something that could have torn them apart but instead had united them. Eventually, Beth's mother came to understand that they needed to do what was best for Sarah and their family. The experience had taught them the value of love, trust, and perseverance, and they were determined to hold on to those lessons. With the bed gone and life returning to normal, the Knotts found a new rhythm. Their home was once again filled with laughter and love, and the fear that had once gripped them was a distant memory. They continued to move forward, building on the lessons they had learned and creating new memories as a family. The bed, once a source of fear and anxiety, was now just a story they would one day tell, a reminder of the strength they had found in each other. The future was bright, and they were ready to embrace it. One day, months after the bed had been removed, there was another knock at the door. It was the dealer again, this time holding an envelope. He handed it to Mike without a word and walked away. Inside the envelope was a note and a small, old-fashioned key. The note simply read, "I thought you might want this." Mike turned the key over in his hand, puzzled. What did it unlock? And why had the dealer given it to him? The questions swirled in his mind, but he had no answers. The mystery of the bed wasn't over yet. The key weighed heavily in Mike's hand, a tangible reminder of the bed and the mystery that surrounded it. The note was cryptic, offering no explanation or context. Mike and Beth stared at the key, unsure of what to do next. What did the dealer know, and why had he given them the key now after all this time? They considered reaching out to him, but something held them back. The bed was gone, and they didn't want to reopen old wounds. But the key was a mystery they couldn't ignore. After much discussion, Beth and Mike decided not to pursue the mystery further. They had finally found peace, and they didn't want to risk losing it. The key was a reminder of a past they were eager to forget. They placed it in a drawer, out of sight but never truly out of mind. Some things they decided were better left alone. They had come too far to let curiosity pull them back into the darkness. The bed, the key, the dealer, it was all part of a chapter they were ready to close for good. The Knotts chose to focus on their future, leaving the past behind. They made a promise to each other to never let anything come between their family again. They had faced fear and uncertainty and had come out stronger on the other side. The bed was gone, and with it, the darkness that had once threatened their happiness. They were determined to build a life filled with love, laughter, and light. The key, the dealer, the bed, all were left in the past, where they belonged. The future was theirs to create, and they were ready. As time passed, the memory of the bed and the fear it brought began to fade. The Knotts moved forward, creating new memories and living their lives without the shadow of the past hanging over them. Sarah grew, her nightmares a distant memory, replaced by dreams of a bright and happy future. Beth and Mike found peace, knowing they had made the right choices for their family. The bed was just a story now, a part of their past that would one day be told around the dinner table as a lesson in love, resilience, and the power of family.